So let's talk about ethics and training in ethics. This video should be viewed along with the post that I'm going to put tomorrow on my blog, normanmarks.wordpress.com, about ethics training. That post is going to be primarily for internal auditors, but in this video I want to talk about some experiences I had that illustrate some of the problem. The first one was when I was the head of internal audit at the Tosco Corporation, and this was fairly early in my time with them. I was there for a total of 10 years. This was only after maybe 2 or 3 years, and we had new policies around human resources, around the way in which we treated other people, especially sexual harassment and other inappropriate behaviors. And what I found was that the head of tax, a fine gentleman who reported directly to the chief financial officer, the CFO, for the corporation as a whole, he was getting into trouble. He was getting into trouble because he was saying things to people on his team and others. He was even doing things that were not appropriate, were not acceptable. And I was actually in the training that we had on this new policy with him, and with maybe about another 10, 20 people in finance broadly and executives from the corporate side. And it was clear he understood the policy. He knew what the words meant. And when we did training and testing on it, he passed because he knew the policy. He was a tax guy. He knew that level of detail. But he was still getting into trouble even after the training, because he was doing things which were actually not acceptable. Saying things to people as they walked in, like young ladies, telling them how nice they looked. You can't do that anymore. Certainly, at least that was the interpretation that we had at that time, and maybe even today. The second year of training, he again demonstrated proficiency in understanding what the words meant. But again, he was still getting into trouble. So I went to visit with him, and I told him that he can't say this and he can't do that. He can't put his hand around anybody, male or female. He can't compliment somebody on their looks. You just can't do that. And he didn't understand. It was clear he didn't understand, because this is the way that people had been behaving forever. And he was probably in his mid-30s to early 40s. So he'd been around a while. He was a very experienced executive, a manager. But I had to explain to him what he could and couldn't do in practice, and it was going further than just reading the words. So he talked about different scenarios of what he and how he would behave, and eventually he got it. Now, some years later, I was doing an investigation of the behavior of some IT people, the manager of our IT department in Suzhou, China, and his team. And we found that this manager had set up his wife with a new business, and he was buying all of the equipment and services required to establish the IT capability in Suzhou through his wife. And she in turn was dealing with their friends and acquaintances in actually procuring all of these materials and services. Now, he was smart enough not to put his own name on his wife's company, but still, we found it. And when I sat down with him, I asked him, had he read the company's ethics policy? Yes. Did he understand it? Yes. Was he in fact giving business through his wife? Yes. What's the problem? He said. He understood the words, not necessarily the full meaning, because the policy had not been translated into Mandarin, and his English was decent but not necessarily sufficient for him to fully appreciate everything that was being said. Anyway, I talked to his staff who were involved in this fraud, because that's what it was. And they had the same kind of reaction. They were certainly taking his lead, but they felt that what they were doing was fine, because that was the Chinese way, traditional way, that you dealt with people you trusted, even people you knew, even people in the family, rather than going to strangers who might give you the better price. You dealt with people you trusted. It was relationships, all built on relationships. So in that situation, I came back and we talked to the legal and how they were going to, and HR, and how they were going to lead training, because this training needed to be revamped. First of all, it had to be in Mandarin instead of in English. The policy had to be translated similarly, not only into Mandarin, but into other languages that we were dealing with. And in some cases, we maybe needed to, even in China, conduct the training in the local dialect rather than even Mandarin, depending upon what people actually understood. Because we wanted to make sure that not only did they understand what the words mean, but they understood what it meant in practice. And this comes back to what I talk about in the blog, which is that don't teach them and test them just on the words in a policy, but try and make sure they actually understand what is behind that policy, what the words really mean, and the behavior that we want to encourage or discourage. And the best way to do that is by showing examples and hypothetical situations and saying, how would you handle this? And how would you handle that? And maybe some of these, at least initially, are fairly black and white. And you want to make sure that, yes, they feel comfortable and they know where that clear line is. Some of them may be more difficult and there's more grey, which is more real life. And then you can have a constructive discussion. And as a team, hopefully, especially if you get the management team to go through this scenario-based training, they can be on the same page. They can take the lead from the CEO or general counsel or head of HR in terms of what is acceptable and desired behavior. So ethics training, to me, if it's only about knowledge of the ethics policy or code of conduct, will not necessarily lead to the desired behavior or the lack of undesirable behavior. Instead, it's far better to do scenario-based training, especially in a group where you can get people talking and sharing what they would do to bring people onto the same page so they would address that situation in the same way, in a consistent fashion, because sometimes you do need to have consistent behavior among your executive team. So if you want to know more, like I said, have a look at the blog post at normanandmarks.wordpress.com. And if you like this video, there's more on my channel on YouTube. Thank you.